Hello again. Welcome to Denton's Tales. Gay Vikings. Yes, well, that's not something you hear mentioned every day. No, not by a long way. To many people, that would seem to be a contradiction in terminology, because there are still many who think in terms of old stereotypes. Yes, all Scotsmen wear kilts. Well, of course they do. Americans are all filthy rich and live in Beverly Hills. Germans go around in leather shorts with funny little hats with some disembodied goat hair on the side. And of course, Irishmen are all a bunch of alcoholics who positively swim in the Guinness, and cirrhosis of the liver is a national medical condition. It isn't, actually. I mean, gay Vikings. Yes, you see, people would say Vikings were big, strong, hairy, powerful warriors, totally fearless, sailing off to savagely fight their way across the known world. Unstoppable, yes, the very symbol of masculinity. Oh, yes, macho-ness taken to its ultimate limit with an insatiable desire for women, raping every woman who still had a pulse, and any who didn't as well, probably. And now you, yes, you want to reduce history's greatest he-men to a bunch of drag queens in a boat, trying not to break a fingernail. Oh, yes, stereotypes. But a distortion of reality that, as it applies to the great warriors from Scandinavia, needs to be put in proper perspective. The idea that just being gay would mean you couldn't be Vikings, or indeed warriors of any culture, as many people do still suppose. The strange idea that being gay means one has to wear a lovely pink feather boa and, pumps around in a dress with a limp wrist and, call everybody darling. It's utterly ridiculous. As is the suggestion that being gay would prevent anyone being a warrior. Years ago, when gays couldn't legally serve in the armed forces, many of them had, of course, done so, often for years without anyone ever noticing. Well, so much for the limp wrist, darling. They lived among other men. They'd been with them in the showers, and, well, if a guy dropped the soap, well, nothing happened. No. Sorry to disappoint you, but it didn't. They looked and behaved just the same as all the other men, because they were the same as all the other men, and they fought just as bravely, many receiving little gratitude for that when they were outed to their superiors. As one U.S. Marine who'd been decorated for gallantry in Vietnam put it rather well, I thought, they gave me a medal for killing dozens of men, and they threw me out of the army for loving one. Yes, very good point when you think about it. But if you say gay Viking, a lot of people have this image of, oh, really, I'll say, do you actually want me to get in that little boat thing? Oh, it's all open to the elements. Oh, think what the seawater will do to me hair. Oh, just got it blow-waved and all. To say nothing to get me death from frostbite or something. And swing a great big heavy axe. Oh, I just got my nails done. Really, darling, I can't possibly go on this plunder trip thing of yours. It's just not me, Ducky. No, it's not me. And the rape thing, oh, definitely not me, dear. So, we may ask the question, could gay men have been great manly warriors? Well, some famous gay or bisexual figures from the past were certainly exactly that. Alexander the Great, well, he did pretty well, conquered most of the known world. Julius Caesar, nicknamed the Queen of Bithynia after his affair with King Nicomedes of that country. King Richard the Lionheart, he was pretty good at military matters. Stephen Decatur, great hero of the United States Navy. King Frederick the Great of Prussia. Lord Kitchener of Khartoum, famous for that World War I poster, your country needs you, with the big mustache. Well, none of them went into battle with a limp wrist and eyeshadow, and I would not have liked to inform, well, let us say Julius Caesar, that he was whatever the old Latin term was for poof. No, bad idea. Certainly would have affected your longevity, should we say. The important first question has to be, did homosexuality exist in the Viking Age? Well, it's not really a hard question. The answer is, oh, yes, of course it did. Can I prove that? Well, there's nothing like an inscription on a runestone somewhere from Hagar the Bloodthirsty that he lusts after Eric the Skull Crusher. No, nothing like that. But I don't need, you see, documented proof. Both logic and medical science establish it for me. Homosexuality existed in every age of human history, from the Stone Age to the present day, prehistory. We even have an account of a homosexual relationship written in cuneiform on Babylonian clay tablets dating from the 3rd millennium BC, telling the story of King Gilgamesh of Uruk and his lover Enkidu, whom he loved as a woman. Yes. So obviously homosexuality existed in the Viking Age just as it did in all the other ages. I mean, why would it exist everywhere except Scandinavia? And it just didn't happen to exist there, which is a bit ridiculous. Some people seem to think homosexuality was invented during the 19th century by Oscar Wilde, strolling down Oxford Street in a beautiful velvet suit with a green carnation in his buttonhole. Though it has existed as long as sexuality itself. I mean, Ugg the caveman looked with desire at other cavemen, and Ugget the cavewoman did the same with other cave women. Homosexuality, what's a natural thing, it occurs among many species of animals as well as humans, and they of course couldn't invent it, nor could they decide to try it just for fun, to see what it was like. It was a natural thing to them, just as it was and is to humans. It is an integral part of sexuality, but it always has been. So we can say, yes, homosexuality existed in the Viking Age, but it is never mentioned as such in any of the Norse sagas. There are no mentions of homosexual couples of either sex, nor for that matter is heterosexual sex a topic that makes more than a very brief appearance in the sagas. Marriage and having children, yes, or avoiding doing so for that matter, but sex itself, no. I mean, there's no how to do it descriptions, if you like. It is assumed rather than stated, which I suppose is logical enough. I mean, if you have children, then presumably you've done what was required to achieve that result biologically. You know, a quick bit of hanky-panky, how's your father, and there you go, you're now parents. But it seems that the Old Norse didn't regard a same-sex encounter as unnatural or against the laws of gods or men as such, at least, well, until Christianity arrived, and then things changed considerably. But for a man to submit to the sexual attentions of another man, now that was seen as degrading and humiliating. It would be called ergi, meaning effeminate, and he'd lose any honor and dignity he had possessed if he submitted. You see, that was the deciding factor, the act of submission, because, you see, only women submitted. Oh yes, big, strong, macho men, well, they never submitted to anything. No, not at all, person thought. Basically, if he was the one underneath, thus taking the role of the woman, willingly taking the role of the woman, oh, no, he couldn't have that. I mean, real manly men, they didn't just lie there and take it. Good heavens, no. Now, if he was on top, well, that was fine. He was merely being masculine and assertive, showing his male dominance. Oh, yes, nothing wrong with that. But a bit hard to understand, really. I mean, well, it was still a man with a man, but it was a case where intent didn't really come into it, and size didn't matter. But position did. And we're not talking the Kama Sutra here. On top, very bone and macho. On the bottom, oh, disgusting. Yes. Male captives from raids could be raped to show the dominance of their captors. I'm up here, you're down there, you are now my plaything. Yes, what more was there to say? The captives had certainly gotten the point. How extensive its use was by the Vikings we don't know, but it was done, just as it was in other lands as well. So in a homosexual context, the man taking the upper, masculine role was not regarded as being shameful or effeminate, simply showing his dominant will. Look at me, dominating this pathetic, weak excuse for a man underneath me. He's nothing more than a woman with extra bits. Yes. But the bottom half of the duo, oh, that was deemed unmanly, even cowardly, by willingly playing the role of the woman, even if he hadn't had any choice in the matter, because Eric the really nasty was standing over him with a big axe at the time. See, it wasn't the sex act as such that was condemned, it was the man's submissive attitude to it. and of course willingly submissive. Well, oh dear, I mean, you couldn't get around that. You see, even men who practiced the art of Seder, the almost exclusively female form of shamanic magic, they also ran the risk of being seen as ergi, because they took a woman's role and they did it willingly. The willingly part, of course, was the deciding factor there. Almost all our information about Norse culture comes down to us not from the time when people were actually doing those things on top or underneath, but rather from more than 200 years later, after the end of the Viking Age, and it was written by Christians. Stories recounted in the Eddas, compiled by Snorri Sturluson circa 1220 AD, would have dated from hundreds of years previously. But you see, they were verbal tales, recounted by travelling poets and storytellers, men and women, called skalds, handed down by word of mouth. But their presence in the Eddas and in the Codex Regius, the royal book, an Icelandic document compiled circa 1270 AD, is due to later Christian adaptation, and we often have no idea what they may have altered or even omitted altogether to suit a Christian viewpoint. Some well-known, supposedly Old Norse symbols we know date from much later, and we know Snorri altered things to suit Christian readers. The concept of hell, for example, being a place of utter misery and despair, oh so woeful, whereas the pagan concept of hell, spelt with one L and having the same name as the goddess who ruled over it, hell, well, it was very far from that idea. It was just kind of, well, life after you were dead, if you want to put it that way. Given the church's attitude to sex, well, even heterosexual sex, well, heterosexual sex was only for making babies. Oh yes, if you enjoyed it, that was a sin. Don't smile or laugh while you're at it. Oh, it's straight to hellfire and brimstone for you. Yeah, so the very idea of that abomination of same-sex hanky-panky, well, that was anathema. So it seems more than likely that those retelling of the old tales would have been, well, sanitized, shall we say. Yes, cut out the nasty bits. Yes. Make it, more acceptable to Christians. You do it to have children. Don't enjoy it, whatever you do, or you are committing a sin. Smile and you're committing a sin. Oh, yes. Yes, that's you, Warren. Sex was very important to the Old Norse, at least as it related to what happened 9 months afterwards, because reproduction was a paramount feature of Norse society. Getting married and having families was actually an obligation, since they were an agricultural society, something that might not come as readily to the average person. They would maybe see it as a surprise to a lot of people who have the popular image of Vikings as being nothing but raiders. That's all they did, 365 days a year, pillaging and looting all over the place. As a society, they relied principally on agriculture and fishing. Crops being grown and harvested, animals reared for meat and clothing, eggs collected, fish caught, and so on. But that requires plenty of people to work the land or to go out fishing. So having children was vital to one's survival, especially in an age before social welfare, old age pensions, and the like had been invented. As you grew older and less able to work or go out raiding, indeed, for that matter, it was important to have children and grandchildren, as many of them as possible, lots and lots of them, to keep things going and to look after you. So reproduction was important to the social structure as a whole and to each family as well. You wanted to be surrounded by armies of children and grandchildren. Any sex that didn't produce a result 9 months later, well, it was a waste of valuable resources, you might say. So if you're breeding like a randy rabbit, doing your duty for your community and surrounded by children and grandchildren, but Olaf next door does nothing but cuddle his boyfriend, well, you can be forgiven for thinking he's not pulling his weight. He's letting down the community because he's not doing it. Yes, that. Trying to avoid marriage was actually penalized, regardless of why someone might be doing it, or rather not doing it. See, the reason you didn't want a marital partner was irrelevant. It was your duty to your family and to your community to marry and produce children. And the man who tried to duck out of a partnership, well, he was called a footfloggy, meaning one who flees from the female organ in that case. And a woman doing the same was a Framfluge, with the same meaning, only the other way around, running away from the male organ. So while being unwed because you were so ugly that only a sight-impaired person would touch you with an oar, well, that was fine. You'd done your best. No, not your fault. Not your fault if you had a face like the arse end of a goat. But to avoid marriage by choice, that would bring the law down on you. And of course, having no sexual desire for someone would be a very good reason for not wanting to produce children with them. That wasn't an excuse you would trot out of the old thing by a long way. It has been suggested that if you got married and had children, the important business taken care of as far as society was concerned, then whatever you might do after that wasn't as important as it might otherwise have been. And you kept your intimate desires discreet, of course. Keep it behind closed doors. You've been a good Norseman or woman and you made babies. Nobody's going to care very much what you're doing after that. But appearing to follow the accepted rules of society would be beneficial, and actually producing an offspring or two would be a considerable advantage. Look, I've parented children. Nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. Look at all those kids. I made them. I'm okay. Yes. Well, once Christianity took over, of course, attitudes changed. While pagans were more interested in how and why it was done, the church condemned the fact that it was done. Active or submissive, on top or underneath, it was all the same to them, and both were equally condemned, unless you were doing it just to make babies, and then that was all right. The civil law codes drawn up in Iceland of the old thing before Christianity made no mention of sexual relations between men, nor women either, for that matter. Whatever might be thought of it, there was no legal restriction on it. It was legal, well, it was legal insofar as it wasn't illegal. And it was only when church law came into force that it was real specifically mentioned. One church document, circa 1200 AD, the Icelandic Homily Book, states that a horrendous crime is committed by those appalling secret sins perpetrated by men who respect men no more than women. Yes, you see, disrespecting women was fine. No, they didn't matter. Who worries about them? And it brings bestiality into it, which is rather strange, by adding to the list those who violate quadrupeds. Yes. In a list of penances from the latter part of the 12th century, 10 years of penances, and a flogging too, are mentioned for adultery between men. And once again, those evil sins committed by men on quadrupeds. Yeah, they're at it again with the quadrupeds. Now, women were also included. Oh yes, they roped the women into it this time. Of a woman-to-woman relationship, it states, if women satisfy one another, they shall be given the same penance as men who perform the most hideous adultery between them, or with a quadruped. What this concern about quadrupeds was all about, I don't really know. I mean, what were they getting up to in Iceland at that time? And apparently the women were at it as well. And remember, this is not pagans we're talking about. Oh, no, this is 200 years after the conversion of Iceland to Christianity. It does bring to mind that saying that in days of old, men were men and sheep were worried. Probably those little Icelandic ponies as well. I mean, imagine a pony in its stall, and it looks out. Here comes Olaf with a funny look on his face. And he doesn't have the bridle, the curry comb, or the food bucket. Why does he look so happy? Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. The church's prohibitions on intimacy between men, between women, and between anybody with those quadrupeds, of course, and the use of the word ergi are proof enough of the existence of homosexuality in Iceland, and by extension in the Norse world in general. Well, the romantic concept, at least. The word homosexual would have meant nothing back then. It didn't even come into use until 1869 as an adjective in German, and in English usage in 1891. There are tiny plaques of beaten gold that have been discovered in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, known as gulgulur, which means little old golden man, dating from the late Iron Age. circa 550 to 800 AD. The name recorded in 1791 in Sweden, the name given them by villagers in one area where many of them have been found, and some 3,000 of these have been discovered. They often depict men and women facing one another and embracing or just holding each other's arms, which have been seen as representing the female Jotun or giant, Gerda, and the god associated with fertility, Freyr. And some archaeologists think they may have been used at weddings, for example, perhaps signifying sexual unions. Others suggest the figures are merely dancing, but really we have no idea what they're doing. They're certainly not doing it with quadrupeds, which is fine. But there are two of these little gold plaques that show a same-sex couple embracing, dancing, or whatever it is they are actually doing. One shows a couple with distinctive female long braided hair, obvious breasts, and wearing dresses, holding each other by the arm. And the other one shows two people with beards, unlikely to be a woman, who have their arms on each other's waists. Could these depict same-sex intimacy? No, it's possible, I suppose. But see, we must consider other possibilities as well. Societies in which men and women dance separately, for example, often facing each other but not making physical contact, or where men and women danced only with those of their own sex. Here in Ireland, men and women sat on opposite sides of the country dance halls, the ballrooms of romance, as they were called. Not that there's ever much romance to be found there. Oh yes, the parish priest saw to that. So when they got up to dance, well, touching was frowned on. You know, it was all very, very proper. As Kenny Everett used to say on his BBC programme, it was all done in the best possible taste. Never was, actually. But anyway, these little gold figures could simply be, well, they could be dancers, two men or two women dancing together, or they could just represent two friends greeting one another. There's really no way to tell for certain. The poses are unusual, to be sure, but there were various forms of these objects. Sometimes just a single figure, animals on others, or a tree was shown between the figures. These two are the only ones to show couples of the same sex doing whatever it was they were doing, which might indeed indicate a genuine same-sex relationship, given how few of this type there are, 2 out of 3,000. It's evidence that could support the same-sex theory if that's what you wanted to support, or it could be nothing more than a symbol of friendship, or simply two of them just happened to get made that way in a flight of fantasy by some goldsmith after he'd consumed too much mead and will signify nothing whatsoever except the possible hangover he had afterwards. I must stress that all speculation on this subject, and indeed much else about the Viking Age, depends mostly on verbal tales handed down by word of mouth for centuries before somebody who didn't believe in them actually wrote them down. And even then, that was 200 years after the old pagan ways had ceased to exist. There is speculation from various references that people could have been executed, their heads bashed in and tossed into bogs for deviant sexual activities. But again, that could be later ideas being put forward. We have nothing dating from pre-Christian times that says that, or anything else for that matter. There is no pre-Christian recorded source that we can say is unaltered and exactly like it was in pagan times. Unfortunately, they didn't write things down, of course. They could have used the runes to do that, but they didn't, which is a pity. So we have to rely on the later Christian retelling, however accurate or not that may be. But on that subject, logic dictates that if being the underdog, literally in this case, made one ergi, that would also apply to a consensual homosexual relationship, since both parties would be the bottom one at some stage. So while doing one's social duty and producing children to prove it might mean that anything else went on, in private, out of sight, wouldn't arouse any great interest, at the same time, keeping it very discreet would have been advisory, since what you did in private might not interest other people, but if you were, shall we say, at it like the clappers on the village green, you might indeed have ended up in a bog hole. The curious double standard that we've talked about, that could have worked two ways, you see, making it perfectly fine for a warrior to dominate a captive, but equally condemning a consenting couple for doing exactly the same thing. I mean, if you're putting it in, you're putting it in, and anyway, you see what I mean. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, well, tell your friends, or tell the world for that matter. Yes, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and sit with bated breath in excited anticipation awaiting the next wonderful, amazing, brilliant, thrilling, captivating, unsurpassed, and yet totally modest, of course, video. Until that time, I shall say goodbye for now. I hope you have enjoyed this little look at a rather unusual subject. So, goodbye for now. Until